We're so excited.
Everyone
to
warned
finally
us
be
about the
moving
neighborhood's
in.
infamous
Look at this place.
HOA
It's
president
perfect.
before
I can't
we
wait
moved
to
in.
unpack everything. Excuse me.
But no
you're
one said
violating
just how
HOA
far Karen would go to
regulations.
control every inch of our lives in when she tried to impose her ridiculous rules on us. She had no idea our entire family of lawyers was ready for war. Before you read what happened when she called the police on us, just for refusing her made-up HOA laws, make sure you follow Sham's stories so you never miss the wildest tales of justice served. From the day we closed on the house, Karen had been lurking. She lived 3 doors down, but that didn't stop her from showing up at our property the very next morning with a clipboard, sunglasses too big for her face, and a self-important strut that screamed trouble. My wife and I had moved in with our 2 adult children, both practicing attorneys. After buying a fixer-upper in a community that Karen insisted was prestigious, but had more gossip than charm, we expected renovation, noise, dust, and neighborly hellos. But what we got was unsolicited commands from someone who treated the HOA guidelines like divine scripture she personally authored. She started by demanding we get pre-approval before painting our mailbox black, claiming it violated neighborhood aesthetics. When I politely informed her that the HOA charter didn't restrict mailbox colors, she told me I was interpreting the law incorrectly. That was her first mistake. My son Ryan, who practices civil litigation, pulled out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws within minutes and walked her through the lack of any such provision. She didn't take it well. Her mouth twitched, eyes darted, and she muttered something. About calling the board, it only escalated from there. Over the next few weeks, Karen seemed to believe she had the authority to approve everything from our landscaping to where we parked our cars. She left notes passive-aggressive, all-caps messages taped to our front door, our mailbox, even our garbage bin, citing infractions like using mulch instead of pine straw or leaving a ladder in view during renovations. Each time, we responded with legal references and documentation. But the more we used facts, the more irrational she became. The real showdown began when she tried to enforce no visitors after 8 p.m., rule which didn't exist. We had friends over to celebrate our daughter Jessica's birthday. Nothing loud or inappropriate, just a backyard dinner under string lights. Karen appeared out of nowhere with her ever-present clipboard and barked that we were in violation of noise ordinances and gathering limits. Jessica calmly asked her to leave the property, citing trespassing laws. Karen crossed her arms, tilted her head, and said, "I'm the HOA president. This entire street is under my jurisdiction." That was mistake number 2. Jessica, who specialized in constitutional and property law, recited the exact statutes she was violating just by being there uninvited. Karen turned red, threatened to take this to the board, and stormed off. The next morning, we woke up to find a notice taped to our door that claimed we owed $500 in fines for violating community standards. There was no letterhead, no HOA seal, and the fine print was riddled with legal inaccuracies. That's when we decided enough was enough. My wife Marie, a family lawyer with a penchant for legal writing, drafted a 7-page response citing every state and local code Karen had either misquoted or made up. We sent copies to the HOA board, our attorney network, and yes, we even seesawed Karen, whose only response was a 1-line email. "You'll regret this." We didn't take it seriously at first. We figured she was embarrassed, maybe licking her wounds. But 3 days later, as I was mowing the lawn, I saw her standing at the edge of our property, phone in hand, glaring like she was gathering evidence. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of our house. 2 officers stepped out, looking confused and mildly irritated. "We got a call about a disturbance," one said. "Your neighbor said there's an ongoing civil dispute and possible harassment." I nearly laughed. I calmly invited them inside, where Ryan and Jessica were both working from home. We laid out every interaction, every note, every false claim. Marie brought out the file folder we had labeled Karen, HOA evidence. One officer actually chuckled when he read one of Karen's complaint notes about our non-regulation shrub height. They left without taking any action against us, clearly annoyed they'd been used for a petty power trip. Karen, however, didn't stop. The following week, she filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, claiming we were unfit residents who posed a legal threat to the peacefulness of the community. She accused us of bullying, harassment, and even weaponizing the law. We attended the hearing, of course, and brought more than enough evidence to dismantle her claims. The board, visibly overwhelmed by the absurdity of her accusations and our stack of documentation, dismissed the complaint unanimously. But Karen wasn't done. She doubled down, standing on street corners warning neighbors about us, gossiping about the lawyer family as if we were villains. She even called animal control, claiming our dog was aggressive ease, a 12-year-old beagle who sleeps more than he barks. Each false report she made was another nail in her own coffin. We recorded her trespassing, got witness statements from neighbors tired of her antics, and started preparing a civil harassment case. But the real kicker came when she sent a threatening letter, demanding we move out or face legal action. She signed it as president of the HOA, but that was her third and final mistake. Turns out Karen had been operating without proper authority for years. Her term had expired, but due to lack of community interest, she never stepped down or held a re-election. The board assumed she was just keeping things afloat, but legally she was no longer president and had no power whatsoever. That discovery blew everything open, and what followed next turned the entire HOA upside down. Karen had been masquerading as HOA president for nearly 2 years beyond her actual term. Somehow no one in the neighborhood had questioned it until we pulled the official documents. Ryan obtained the HOA's articles of incorporation and bylaws through a public records request and confirmed that not only had Karen's term expired, but the last election hadn't even been properly recorded. She wasn't just overstepping her authority. She didn't have any. We presented this information to the board at the next meeting, complete with timestamps, dated minutes, and a detailed comparison between her self-appointed role and what the charter legally required. The board members, mostly older residents who had long since checked out of active participation, sat in stunned silence as we explained how Karen's fabricated leadership was null and void. One member, visibly shaken, admitted that Karen had just kept things moving and nobody had wanted to deal with the responsibilities themselves. That complacency had allowed her to create her own little empire of HOA tyranny. But what happened next truly flipped the narrative. The board voted unanimously to suspend all Karen's involvement until an emergency election could be held. This should have ended it, but instead, it was gasoline on Karen's already raging fire. The very next morning, we found a printed neighborhood. Alert stuffed into every mailbox on the street. The dramatic headline, "Dangerous Lawyers Try to Hijack Community, HOA at Risk." It was laughably bad. She accused us of conspiracy, manipulation, and trying to dismantle the peaceful way of life in the neighborhood. She even tried to claim that we were falsifying legal documents to destroy her reputation, conveniently. Ignoring the public record, Kern started knocking on doors, gathering signatures for a petition to have our family removed from the HOA entirely, which was not even a real mechanism under the bylaws. We received frantic texts and calls from some of the newer residents asking if any of this was true. So we did what any family of lawyers would do. We held a community meeting. We rented the local library's multi-purpose room and hand-delivered flyers inviting all neighbors to attend a legal Q&A and HOA clarification session. The turnout shocked even us. Over 60 residents showed up, some curious, some furious, and all desperate to understand the growing chaos. We laid out the facts calmly and clearly. Jessica walked everyone through the HOA charter, explaining what rules were real and which ones Karen had invented. Ryan explained how enforcement was supposed to work legally, and Marie spoke on homeowner rights and protections. We had physical packets printed for every attendee, and by the end of the evening, the mood had completely shifted. Several people admitted they'd been afraid to speak up about Karen for years, thinking she had real power. Others shared stories of fines, threats, and midnight notes slipped under doors. One older couple recounted how Karen had shamed them for having a garden gnome, telling them it was visual pollution. Now, everyone realized she'd been nothing more than a self-appointed dictator. The emergency election happened within a week, and to no one's surprise, Karen was not on the ballot. She tried to submit a last-minute candidacy but failed to gather the required signatures. 3 new board members were elected to retirees and 1 young mom, who all made it clear They intended to restore fairness and sanity to the HOA. You'd think this would be the end of Karen's reign of control. But instead, she took a darker turn. She began parking her car across the street from our house, sitting in it for hours with binoculars, writing in a notebook, clearly trying to catch us doing something illegal. Once we saw her take photos of Ryan loading groceries into the trunk and then speed off, only for an anonymous noise complaint to be filed later that day. Of course, it didn't go anywhere, but the intent was clear. She was trying to make our lives miserable through intimidation. Walk her dog slowly past our driveway, muttering insults just loud enough to hear. "Parasites," she hissed once. And another time, "I hope your licenses get revoked." Jessica documented every incident. We installed security cameras, filed a police report for harassment, and began building a civil case for stalking and emotional distress. Meanwhile, we learned that Karen had alienated almost every neighbor on the block. One by one, people started forwarding us the emails she'd sent over the years, demands for money, accusations of code violations, threats of fines for non-existent rules. We compiled them all into one neat dossier and added it to our growing legal file. But what broke her was not the legal threat. It was the social collapse. After the community meeting and election, Karen found herself completely isolated. The board ignored her. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The same people she used to bully now stood up to her, quoting our handouts when she tried to cite fake rules. She grew more erratic, calling in complaints to the city about unregistered construction, illegal gatherings, and even unlicensed legal practices, which made the city clerk laugh when she read the report. One day, a city inspector did show up to verify a noise complaint, ended up chatting with us over coffee after we showed him the mountain of evidence we had on Karen. He even offered to submit an internal memo, flagging her for malicious and false reporting. Still, she didn't stop. We had our attorney send her a formal cease and desist letter, warning of an impending harassment suit. She responded with a handwritten note in red ink, claiming we were violating her right to community oversight. It was bizarre, delusional, and sad, but also dangerous, because she clearly felt she had nothing left to lose. Things escalated further when Karen tried to provoke a physical confrontation. While Marie was pulling weeds in our front yard, Karen marched up the sidewalk, phone camera rolling, accusing her of destroying communal property. Marie didn't engage. She calmly stepped back inside and called the non-emergency police line. When officers arrived, Karen claimed we had assaulted her. We showed them the security footage. No one had touched her, approached her, or even responded. Verbally, that's when the officers finally issued a formal warning against her. But she still didn't stop. And we knew the only way to end it once and for all was to take her to court. Taking Karen to court wasn't something we rushed into. We were still neighbors. After all, and we hoped she might eventually realize she had gone too far and back down on her own. But after months of stalking behavior, false reports, and community disruption, we decided it was necessary not just to protect ourselves, but to send a message that no one, not even a self-declared HOA queen, was above the law. With all four of us being legal professionals, preparing the case was methodical and precise. Ryan focused on compiling all documented interactions, including timestamps, photos, videos, and neighbor testimonies. Jessica handled the statutory and tort claims, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Marie worked on structuring the narrative for the civil complaint, highlighting Karen's pattern of behavior and the emotional and psychological harm it had caused, while I managed the administrative side. Contacting the court clerk, organizing our timeline, and submitting the necessary paperwork. Within 3 weeks, we filed a formal lawsuit against Karen in county civil court. The complaint was airtight. It included sworn affidavits from over 15 neighbors, copies of Karen's fraudulent HOA notices, her fabricated fines, the cease and desist she ignored, and the video of her trying to falsely accuse Marie of physical assault. We attached the footage of her stalking from her parked car, the audio of her muttering threats, and the list of false police and city reports she had filed. In any other context, this would have been overkill, but knowing Karen, we expected She'd attempt to deny everything, and she did. Soon as she was served, she posted on the community Facebook page a dramatic, all-caps message that read, "The lawyer family is suing me to silence me fight back." She tried to stir sympathy, portraying herself as a helpless widow, being bullied by rich attorneys. She even started a GoFundMe called Save Karen from HOA Tyranny, which raised a whopping $87 before being shut down for violating the site's terms due to misleading claims. She represented herself in court. Of course she did. Up with a stack of hand-annotated HOA pamphlets and a binder labeled Karen's Rights in gold glitter stickers. She opened her defense by claiming we had invaded the moral sanctity of the neighborhood. The judge, an older gentleman who had clearly seen every variety of courtroom chaos, raised an eyebrow and asked her to stick to actual statutes. Karen fumbled, misquoted civil codes, and tried to present blurry phone screenshots as evidence. She insisted we were weaponizing legal technicalities, unaware that every claim we made was backed by actual precedent. It wasn't even close. We stayed calm and professional throughout the hearing. Ryan addressed the pattern of behavior. Jessica cross-examined Karen's statements. Marie explained the psychological stress Karen's campaign had placed on our family, and I concluded with a statement emphasizing our desire not for vengeance, but for peace, accountability, and the safety of our neighborhood. The judge ruled in our favor on every count. Karen was found liable for harassment, defamation, and malicious misuse of public resources. She was ordered to pay damages, cease all direct or indirect contact with our family, and attend mandatory behavioral counseling. She was also issued a restraining order, barring her from coming within 100 feet of our property. That judgment should have been the end, but Karen wasn't done humiliating herself. After court adjourned, she stormed out of the building and tried to confront a local news crew that had shown up to report on the case. Apparently someone had tipped them off about the lawyer family versus rogue HOA president saga. Karen screamed into the camera about neighborhood surveillance, deep state lawyers, a constitutional HOA authority, which made the 6 p.m. news, and turned her into an overnight laughingstock. Within days, the news clip went viral on social media. People everywhere started sharing their own Karen HOA horror stories. Memes of her gold-stickered binder started trending. Local blogs picked up the story, and even a well-known legal podcast invited us on to talk about what they called the most absurd HOA meltdown of the year. We declined the podcast, preferring to let things cool down, but the viral coverage made one thing clear: Karen's credibility was utterly destroyed. The HOA board officially banned her from attending meetings for the next 2 years. She was stripped of all community leadership privileges. Her fake presidency was exposed as not only illegal, but laughably delusional. The new board posted a public notice clarifying all the actual rules and thanking our family for bringing transparency and civility back to the community. Most people were incredibly supportive. Neighbors we hadn't even met came by to say thank you. The older couple across the street baked us a cake. Someone anonymously sent a bouquet with a note that read, "Finally, Karen's reign of terror is over." For a while it felt like peace had returned. But Karen still lived in the neighborhood. Though she had become socially radioactive, she remained defiant. She stopped speaking to anyone, took different routes to walk her dog, and even covered her windows with dark curtains. Her lawn became overgrown. She stopped attending block events. At one point we heard she tried to sell her house but had to pull the listing because no one wanted to buy it once they learned about her. We tried to move on. Our home renovations were finally complete, and we hosted a small neighborhood barbecue to celebrate. Karen, predictably, called the fire department to report an unlicensed grill, but by now even emergency services had her flagged. They didn't even dispatch anyone. Still, we remained cautious. We knew people like Karen didn't just fade away quietly. They imploded, and sometimes they dragged others down with them. That's why we were careful to maintain legal documentation on every interaction, no matter how minor. And it was a good thing we did, because Karen had one last card up her sleeve. She was about to play it in the most shocking way possible. Asterisk. Karen's final move came without warning and blindsided even us. And we had prepared for nearly every scenario imaginable. One quiet Saturday morning around 7 a.m., we woke to the sound of loud, aggressive knocking on our front door. It wasn't the police knock we'd come to recognize after Karen's many false reports. It was louder, frantic, and persistent. Ryan opened the door to find a uniformed officer, accompanied by a man in plain clothes holding a clipboard. "We're here to execute a civil property check," the man said flatly, flashing a generic-looking badge. Instantly on alert, Ryan asked what agency they were from and under what authority they were acting. The man replied that they were responding to an anonymous report of property violations and legal misuse of a residential structure for commercial law. It was a total fabrication. Jessica, who had just come downstairs, immediately demanded identification and legal documentation. When the officer hesitated, we knew something was off. Ree stepped outside with her phone recording in her hand, asking directly, "Is this a search? Do you have a warrant? Are you aware this is a legally occupied residential address with 0 business zoning violations?" The officer, who looked more uncomfortable by the second, asked to speak to the homeowner, and I joined them with a folder of our house deed, inspection reports, and HOA zoning approval documents. When we asked who submitted the complaint, the clipboard man said the request was filed by a concerned member of the homeowners association. At that moment, Jessica opened her laptop, pulled up the county complaint portal, and ran a search. Within minutes, we confirmed that the report had been submitted under Karen's name using a fake email address. But her real phone number, it was the final straw. We told the officer the history, the restraining order, the lawsuit, the judgment, and presented the paperwork proving that Karen was not only barred from contact, but was now engaging in retaliatory civil harassment. The man with the clipboard went pale. "I wasn't told any of this," he muttered, realizing he had been used as a pawn in Karen's personal vendetta. He backed off and left within minutes, apologizing profusely. The officer said he'd file an incident report to add to the growing list against her. We stood on the porch for a few minutes, stunned. Even after losing in court, being publicly shamed, and receiving a restraining order, Karen had taken her obsession to a new level, manipulating government systems to manufacture a legal crisis. We knew then that this wasn't just about control or revenge. It was about Karen's complete inability to accept reality. She needed to believe she was the righteous protector of the neighborhood, and we had shattered that illusion. That same day, we called our attorney and filed a motion for contempt of court. We attached the video footage, the visit log, and the falsified report entry. The court granted an emergency hearing, and within a week, we were back before a judge. This time, Karen showed up disheveled, wearing a wrinkled blazer and visibly shaking. The judge didn't allow her to speak beyond her initial response, reviewed the new evidence, and held her in contempt of the original court order. Her fines were doubled, and she was sentenced to community service and court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to assess her capacity for continued residence in a shared community environment. The judge said plainly, "You are no longer a nuisance, Ms. Karen. You are a danger to others and to yourself." A restraining order extension was approved, this time covering the entire street radius, effectively banning her from walking past our house or interacting with anyone on the block without prior written consent. The neighborhood was relieved. The new HOA board issued a statement fully dissociating the association from Karen and publicly condemning her actions. For the first time in years, the community had clarity, peace, and unity. But despite the formal consequences and mounting legal pressure, Karen continued to unravel. She became reclusive, rarely seen outside except late at night. Neighbors began reporting strange behavior, lights turning on and off at odd hours, loud conversations with no one, and deliveries she never collected. Someone claimed they saw her talking to her mailbox as if it were a person. The HOA board worked with local services to initiate a wellness check, and though she refused to open the door, authorities confirmed she was still living there alone, increasingly unstable. As months passed, her lawn grew into a jungle of weeds. Her house paint began to peel, and several for sale signs were put up and taken down in quick succession. No real estate agent wanted to represent her. No buyer wanted to inherit her history. She was trapped, bitter, and forgotten. Meanwhile, our family thrived. The renovations were done, we landscaped a new backyard garden, and the community finally became what we had hoped for when we first moved in, a peaceful, welcoming environment. The HOA held its first real social gathering in years, and we were asked to co-host. We hesitated, not wanting to appear like we were celebrating Karen's downfall. But the event turned out to be genuine and healing. People shared stories, laughed, and spoke openly about the psychological toll Karen had taken on the community. For the first time, people weren't afraid to be outside, to hang a flag, or to park on the street without a passive-aggressive note. Showing up, in the months that followed, the new board initiated reforms, updated the charter to prevent self-appointed leadership in the future, and formed a neighborhood watch committee not to patrol each other, but to support one another. Karen's legacy had created trauma, but it also inspired permanent change. Ironically, in trying to dominate the community, she had empowered it to come together against her. But despite the healing, despite the victories, a quiet shadow always lingered. We kept our security system active, continued to document everything, and made sure our legal files were always up to date. Because if we'd learned anything through all of this, it was that people like Karen don't just vanish. They hide, they wait, they simmer beneath the surface, ready to strike again, and we were ready for her every single time. It had been almost a full year since the last direct encounter with Karen, and although she had seemingly faded into isolation, the ripple effects of her chaos still echoed quietly across the neighborhood. Most of the homes that had once fallen, silent in fear now, had children laughing in the yards, string lights glowing at night, and neighbors waving again. The community we had moved into, a place we had hoped would offer comfort and connection, had finally started to feel like home. But that lingering sense of caution never truly disappeared. Marie still checked the security footage every evening. Ryan kept the harassment file updated just in case. And Jessica periodically scanned local court records to see if our infamous neighbor had attempted any new filings under a pseudonym. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Because while Karen's house sat rotting with its shutters half-hinged and porch full of weather-warped packages, we knew better than to believe it was truly over. Then, early one Monday morning, a large van pulled up to Karen's driveway. A man in a blazer and sunglasses stepped out, followed by two uniformed officers. At first, we assumed it was another wellness check, but when a woman with a clipboard knocked on the front door and began speaking into a two-way radio, it became clear Corin was being evicted. The house had gone into foreclosure. Not because of the court fines, though, those didn't help, but because she had stopped paying her property taxes entirely for nearly 3 years. The county had filed a lien, and now they were reclaiming the property. Karen didn't answer the door. The officers tried for nearly 10 minutes before forcing entry, and when they came out with her, she was wrapped in a bathrobe, clutching a stack of handwritten complaints and HOA bylaws as if they were sacred scripture. She shouted something about sovereign community rights and legal immunity for HOA founders, but the officers didn't even respond. She was escorted to a black sedan and driven off, not arrested, just removed. No one knew where she went. The house sat vacant for months. And then a big red notice was slapped to the front window. Property seized, pending auction. That was the final chapter of Karen's reign. While her presence lingered in old emails and files on our hard drive, and in the nervous laughter of neighbors who remembered her wrath, she was no longer part of our daily lives. In her absence, the HOA thrived. The board became transparent, functional, and helpful. New families moved in, young couples, retirees, a few people who had heard the Karen story and bought homes here because they admired how the neighborhood had stood up to her. We were interviewed by a national housing blog about neighborhood legal resilience, and though we declined to appear in person, our story was anonymously featured as a case study in how community law can beat community tyranny. Still, even with her gone, we used Karen's legacy to teach. Jessica and Ryan hosted a monthly Know Your Rights workshop at the library for other HOA communities nearby. We shared our story, redacted, anonymized, and helped other residents challenge overreaching boards, lawful fines, and manipulative leadership. What started as a nightmare had turned into a calling, a purpose, something greater than just a fight to protect our lawn or our mailbox color. But we never let our guard down completely. So when, nearly 9 months after her eviction, a neighbor sent a message in the community group chat that read, "Did anyone else see Karen's car parked by the old dog park?" He froze. Within minutes, messages flooded the thread. Same model, same bumper sticker. She was walking around with a camera. She didn't speak to anyone, just stood at the fence for 20 minutes. Ryan pulled the footage from our security cams that showed a dark sedan circling the block. Twice that morning, before parking out of frame, we couldn't prove it was her, but we knew. At night, we filed another incident report and attached stills from the footage. The board reached out to local law enforcement to make sure the restraining order was still active. It was Karen. Hadn't officially violated anything yet, but the message was clear. She was watching. Maybe testing the waters. Maybe just passing through. But people like Karen don't simply disappear. They retreat, they stew, and they wait for weakness. We made a decision as a family that night week would never let this neighborhood fall victim to fear again. We hosted another community meeting, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Knowledge is defense, truth is power, and silence is submission. We shared the update calmly, reaffirmed the legal protections in place, and made clear that no single person, not a neighbor, not a rogue leader, not a self-proclaimed authority would ever again be allowed to control this community through fear. As the meeting ended, someone joked, "We need a plaque on the clubhouse wall that says, 'Don't mess with the lawyer family.'" Everyone laughed, but the point stuck. We didn't want to be seen as heroes or enforcers. We just wanted peace. But we had earned respect, and more importantly, we had helped our neighbors find their voices again. The scars Karen left behind will always be there, quiet reminders of what happens when power goes unchecked. But they also serve as warnings, proof that even the most persistent bully can be stopped when people stand together. And if she ever returns for real, if she ever so much as steps foot back into this neighborhood with bad intentions, we'll be ready. 'Cause this time, she won't be facing just one family of lawyers. She'll be facing an entire street full of people who know their rights, know her game, and know exactly how to shut it down. If this story reminded you of a fight for justice you've been through, or if you want to hear more outrageous HOA drama, neighbor disputes, or legal takedowns, make sure you subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel. After the community meeting ended and the neighbors trickled back to their homes, something shifted, not just in the air, but in the overall mood of the neighborhood. There was a renewed energy, an unspoken but mutual understanding that no matter how peaceful things seemed, there had to be a layer of vigilance maintained. The story of Karen wasn't just a memory or a cautionary tale, it had become part of the neighborhood's fabric. The lawn Karen once kept meticulously trimmed had now become a caution zone for passing kids who would ride their bikes a little faster near the property line. The house sat there gutted of its spirit, its windows clouded, porch creaking in the wind like a haunted landmark. Eventually the county listed it for public auction, and our family couldn't help but monitor the entire process with more interest than we expected. The opening bid was far below market value, and within a week, a young couple won the house sight unseen. They moved in within a month, full of optimism and renovation plans, completely unaware of the war zone they'd just inherited. Out of courtesy and compassion, we offered them the backstory, not in a gossipy way, but so they wouldn't be blindsided by old mail leftover rumors or unexpected visitors looking for Karen. Surprisingly, they were unfazed. They even joked that they'd probably invite us over for legal advice if anything went south. They repainted the house, cleaned up the yard, planted roses, and by the end of the first month, it was nearly unrecognizable. The ghost of Karen's control faded from the structure, but not from everyone's memory. A few weeks later, the new owners found a shoebox buried in the attic. They brought it to us because it was labeled HOA Secrets in thick marker. Inside were dozens of printed emails, annotated documents, and even copied IDs of various neighbors' things Karen had no legal right to possess. There were even drafts of HOA letters she'd never sent, like one accusing a couple of lawn gnome cultism, and another threatening to have a neighbor's dog euthanized over alleged barking violations. We were horrified. It was darker than we thought. We took the box straight to the HOA board, who turned it over to local authorities. It turned out Karen had been keeping unauthorized personal data on multiple residents, including contact information, family schedules, and bizarre psychological notes written in the margins like passive, probably spineless, easy to control. It was chilling, and it validated everything we had feared during those long, tense months. The sheriff's office opened an investigation into Karen's use of personal information, which technically bordered on identity theft and wire fraud. We weren't optimistic they'd find her. She had completely disappeared from the area. The case gave closure to a lot of neighbors who had felt violated but hadn't spoken up before. Several even came forward with stories they had never shared. One elderly woman said Karen once entered her backyard uninvited and scolded her for hanging laundry too high. Another family admitted they moved away primarily because of Karen's endless harassment about their child's chalk art on the driveway. All these stories painted a fuller picture of just how widespread her manipulation had been, and how she had created an ecosystem of silence, shame, and fear by pretending to have legal and moral superiority. The board used the new evidence as the foundation to completely restructure how HOA authority was defined, assigning term limits, requiring formal vote certification, creating a community watchdog role to ensure that no one ever again held unchecked power. And because of everything we'd endured, the board appointed Marie as the first chairperson of the new compliance committee. She accepted, not out of vanity or control, but to make sure that the systems designed to protect residents would never, again, be used as weapons. Jessica and Ryan agreed to run seasonal workshops on residents' rights and HOA accountability, and I was asked to write an annual legal readiness letter for all new homeowners in the neighborhood. Our family had become an institution not feared, but trusted. And in a way, that responsibility felt heavier than anything Karen had thrown at us. We weren't just defending our home anymore. We were guardians of the community's peace. But with that new peace came occasional shadows. Someone spotted Karen's old sedan parked across town weeks later. Another person swore they saw her at a farmer's market wearing sunglasses and a hat, watching people from a bench. There were no photos. No proofs, just that uneasy buzz that kept the community alert. Nothing ever came of it, and part of us hoped it was just paranoia. But what mattered was that no one was afraid anymore. If Karen did come back, there would be no secrecy, no silence. The neighborhood was fortified not by walls or cameras, but by truth and shared resilience. More than anything, Karen's downfall had revealed the power of collective voice. It wasn't our law degrees that brought her down. It was the fact that we stood up and said no. We refused to be gaslit, manipulated, or isolated. And when our neighbors saw us fight, they realized they could do it too. In a final poetic twist, the street that once hosted Karen's regime was selected as a pilot community for a new homeowners advocacy initiative by the state. Our family helped launch it, offering resources and legal insight to neighborhoods suffering from overreaching boards or rogue individuals. We shared tools, sample letters, even guided community groups on how to organize elections and contest illegal fines. The Karen incident, as people called it, became more than a local drama. It became a turning point, a lesson in civic empowerment. But even as things got better, we never let go of what we'd learned. Every time a note appeared on a mailbox, someone double-checked who sent it. Every board meeting was live-streamed. Every new neighbor got a full copy of the bylaws and a personal welcome. Karen had tried to dominate us, but in doing so, she inadvertently built the most resilient neighborhood in the county. We were no longer just residents. We were advocates, guardians, and allies. The fear was gone, but the lessons remained. Etched not just into documents and security footage, but into our hearts. Because when tyranny wears the mask of community leadership, silence is complicity. It had been nearly a year since Karen's final attempt to control our family, and the neighborhood collapsed under the weight of her own lies and overreach. And though the tension she'd created no longer gripped us daily, the echoes of her actions still lingered in subtle ways. Marie would sometimes pause mid-sentence when reading a new HOA notice, as if bracing for an ambush that never came. Jessica still made copies of every interaction with vendors or board members. And Ryan double-checked security camera footage more often than necessary. I kept my legal pad on the kitchen counter, half out of habit, half just in case. We weren't. Paranoid, we were prepared. Life had returned to normal in all the visible ways. The lawns were lush again. Kids played freely without fear of HOA retaliation, and holiday decorations blossomed on every porch without passive-aggressive threats. But something had fundamentally shifted in us. We were no longer just neighbors trying to coexist. We were a unit that had learned the value of community solidarity. The neighborhood had transformed into something that didn't just look welcoming on the surface, it had the substance to match. Every new resident got a full briefing from Marie on the HOA rules and their rights, along with a friendly warning: don't let anyone tell you they can control your home without your consent. The HOA board operated under a strict charter, now one that had been reviewed by multiple attorneys and voted on by a supermajority. Transparency was the new norm. Meeting minutes were posted publicly within 24 hours, and any decision involving fees, citations, or structural mandates required a minimum of 2/3 approval from homeowners. But despite all the change and order, the most striking evolution had occurred in how the community saw itself. The Karen incident had taught everyone that power left unchecked would always find a way to abuse. And perhaps more importantly, it had shown that any one person or family could become a target. It didn't matter how educated, successful, or quiet you whiff. Someone believed they could dominate you through paper, threats, or fake authority. They would try. That lesson stayed with everyone. And yet, through all the darkness Karen brought, she unintentionally gifted the neighborhood with something powerful, a reason to unite. We saw each other now, truly saw one another as more than just people behind hedges and garage doors. We'd shared a war, and now we shared a cause to never allow silence or blind obedience to take root here again. A few months after the new couple finished remodeling Karen's old house, they hosted a backyard party to reintroduce the home to the neighborhood. We all attended. The yard that once bore the tension of petty fines and shouting matches was now filled with laughter, music, and open hearts. It was surreal, almost like watching a nightmare being painted over in real time. At one point, the new homeowner raised a glass and said, "Here's to community, the real kind. It's not the kind that fines you for painting your fence the wrong shade, but the kind that stands up together when things get tough." The whole yard erupted in applause, and for a moment, the weight of Karen's legacy finally lifted. It felt like closure. Not erasure because what happened still mattered, but true closure. In the months that followed, our family continued our advocacy work beyond the neighborhood. We began getting invitations from other communities who had heard about our story through word of mouth or the statewide homeowners advocacy initiative. We shared templates for defending against unauthorized HOA action, explained legal remedies for abusive enforcement, and empowered homeowners to use their voices without fear. One day, a man from another neighborhood asked us, "What gave you the strength to fight back?" And I didn't hesitate, I said, because Karen thought we wouldn't. She underestimated us. She forgot we were lawyers, yes, but more importantly, we were family. We don't back down from bullies no matter what title they hide behind. That response became somewhat of a motto in the advocacy circles we later joined. We helped write new legislation that proposed annual audits for HOA boards, penalties for unauthorized surveillance, and protections for residents who chose to appeal unfair penalties. Karen never resurfaced publicly but once. While scrolling through news from another county, we found a headline about a woman trying to illegally impose HOA-like rules on a neighborhood that didn't even have an HOA. There was no name listed. But a grainy photo showed a figure who looked suspiciously familiar standing behind a podium, holding a stack of flyers. We weren't sure if it was her, but it didn't matter, because even if it was, we knew the cycle would break there too. People talk now, people stand up, people remember what happened when Karen tried to rule our block like a queen without a crown. The house she once ruled from was now a symbol of rebirth, of resilience, of what happens when a community dares to fight back. Our family never intended to become leaders in any of this. We moved in simply wanting peace, a good home, and a friendly neighborhood. But when that was threatened, we didn't fold, we doubled down. We reminded everyone, including ourselves, that no one person, not even an HOA president, gets to rewrite the rules without consensus, legality, and decency. And now, as I sit on the porch, watching my son ride his bike down the street without fear of citation, without Karen's clipboard, waiting around the bend, I realize just how far we've come. Not just from her tyranny, but toward something stronger, more connected, and deeply rooted in justice. We turned Karen's chaos into a community cornerstone. And if anyone ever tries to bring that chaos back, they'll find something waiting. For them, far stronger than fear or submission, they'll find us. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful tales of justice, drama, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel. Your support helps bring these stories to life and share the message that when people stand together, no bully HOA or otherwise can break them. Subscribe now and never miss a fight worth watching.